So I have some outdoor projects to do, and I think learning how to do some timber framing would be super cool.
Do it!
Yeah, but I know very little about timber framing, and I've never done it before.
Well, YouTube that shit.
Sure, yeah, okay. Well, I could do that. I mean, that, I'm not so sure. I'm gonna start with the easiest timber framing project I could think of. What is that, you're asking? We'll all get to that. Let's go. To get started on this project, I went to my stash of reclaimed lumber and I grabbed 2 pieces of Doug fir. My plan is to connect them together by using a large mortise and tenon joint. I think I can handle it. I do call myself a woodworker and I use mortise and tenon joints all the time. To prepare this lumber, I needed to remove some metal. Then I could send it through the planer to get 2 parallel sides. Timber framing is an ancient building method using large timbers joined together with precision cut wooden joints, so no metal screws or nails. This beam was too wide to fit in the planer to get the other 2 sides parallel, so I sanded one side slightly smoothish to run that against my table saw fence. I did need to flip it over and run it through a second time to cut all the way through, as the table saw blade couldn't cut deep enough to make the cut in one pass. Once it was trimmed down, I could then clean up and even up both sides with the planer. At this point, I should have made sure all 4 sides were square, but I pretty much skipped this step. I figured for this project, it was close enough. I gave this first piece a trim and then I started the next beam by trimming that down as well. It then went through the same process as the first beam. This joint is actually going to be a through tenon joint. I will cut half of the shorter of my 2 beams into a tenon, and then the larger of the 2, I will cut a mortise in. The tenon will slide into the mortise for a strong 90-degree joint that will be very strong. This joint has been around forever and is a staple in woodworking. Those clips I've shown are from some amazing woodworkers with some awesome skills. I will link their videos in the description. To lay out my tenon for this project, I marked out how far I wanted my tenon to go into the mortise, which is important because I needed to know where to stop these first cuts and create the shoulders. For the width, I split the beam into thirds. I will save the inner third and remove the 2 outer thirds to create the tenon. I looked at making the long cuts with the handsaw, but then took the beam over to my bandsaw to make the cuts much quicker. There's plenty of room for developing my skill with the handsaw, but I'll have to get to that next time. With the 2 long cuts made, I did use a pull saw to cut the shoulders of the tenon. I did make sure to use the crosscut side of the saw because I completely know what I'm doing. The ripping side of the saw has not seen a lot of use, to be honest. With the outer 2/3 of this beam removed, I grabbed my largest bench chisel and got to work making the shoulder of this tenon square and flat. This chisel is nowhere near the size of a common timber framing chisel. Timber framing chisels can be up to 4 inches wide and 18 inches long. These large tools are struck with a mallet to remove significant amounts of material. For fine tuning, woodworkers use even a larger tool called a slick. A slick can reach 30 inches in length with almost a 3.5 inch wide blade. They typically have an offset handle to keep the worker's hand clear of the workpiece. Unlike chisels, slicks aren't hit with mallets, and I have neither tool, so you won't see me using them in this video. For laying out the mortise, I determined that the most accurate approach was to use the tenon itself as a template. This was a good strategy, though. I would later face an issue because the tenon wasn't perfectly square, a problem that stemmed from the beam not being perfectly square to begin with. As the great duck says, more on that later. After marking the mortise on the first side, I needed to carefully transfer these measurements to the opposite side. This was important since I would be working from both sides to complete the mortise. Since I only own bench chisels and I don't have a mortising chisel, it was time to get some work done with a Forstner bit. Drilling out as much material as possible would give me a good start, allowing me to later clean up the sides with my bench chisels and a mallet. A chisel mortiser would have been awesome to use, and this one looks amazing, but a small benchtop version like the one that I have isn't capable of this depth. With holes drilled as deeply as I could go from one side, I flipped the beam over and went in from the back. I was able to get the drill bit all the way through from the second side. Using my bench chisels, I was able to turn these small round holes into a large rectangle mortise, hopefully to match the tenon I cut on the other beam earlier. Bench chisels are a general purpose woodworking tool that most woodworkers start with because of their versatility. They can handle many different jobs. They can be struck with a wooden mallet for heavy work or pushed by hand for a more delicate task like paring. Proper sharpening is very important to make sure these chisels work well. Better quality steel probably won't get any sharper, but it will hold a sharp edge for a longer period of time. I may have gotten a little use out of the ripping teeth on my pull saw. I'm not sure if this is a normal way to do it though. Next time I make a mortise like this, I hope to try another method. As the name implies, mortising chisels are made to make mortises. They are thick and strong and are made for chopping and leveraging and prying out the wood that needs to be removed for an accurate mortise. Drilling holes to start and then cleaning up the rest with bench chisels like how I did is an acceptable method, but it isn't as traditional as just using a mortise, chisel, and a mallet. It's a nice goal, I believe, to be able to complete jobs in woodworking by trying different methods and learning what works and what we enjoy best. Once I was satisfied with the mortise, I tried to test fit the tenon. It quickly got stuck at this knot, so I marked that spot. I made marks at each place where it got stuck, and then I cleaned up each area, and then I forced it in further, only to get it really stuck. Getting the joint back apart required a big clamp, and even then it wasn't easy. Eventually, I managed to separate the two pieces. After attempting to fit this joint once, I could tell that the tenon needed to be more consistent without any high spots, and it needed to be smoother. I used a hand plane to lower the high spots and then a card scraper to smooth and finish leveling it out. I also added a small chamfer to the edges to make it all fit together a little easier. Next, I was able to ram this joint completely together with my mallet. Once I hammered this joint together, I knew there was no way it was coming back apart. Inexperience and lack of patience led me to smash this thing together without stopping. I think I should have made a few more adjustments to make the tenon even cleaner. I initially planned to use a tusk tenon to secure this joint, similar to what the Third Coast Craftsman did in his video. I felt confident about this approach since I made a few benches with tusk tenons before. However, once I fully seated this joint, I changed my mind. The sole reason was that I didn't want to take this whole thing apart after I hammered the tenon all the way into the mortise. Since I wasn't going to take this back apart and add another mortise for the tusk, I figured adding a couple dowels would also work and it would be much easier at this point. For the dowels, I found some leftover oak dowels. I appreciate the contrasting look that they bring, even if it isn't a big statement piece like the tusk tenon. So here it is, the secret is out. This project is a mailbox post. I bought this mailbox for my wife the Christmas of 2023, and here I am almost 2 years later building a post for it. I told you I'd get to it. I mean, who's on top of things now? Our mailbox is right by the road in gravel, so the plan is to use this metal stake that will hopefully go into the ground and that will hold the post. For some reason in the future, I'm cutting it. I mean, I wonder why. Let's keep watching to find out. To prepare the bottom of this post, I cut it to the length that would put the mailbox at the required height. Then I needed to add some material to the sides so that would fit correctly onto the metal spike. I cut a 45-degree angle on tops for style and so rainwater wouldn't pool on top. Then I glued and nailed one of these pieces onto each side. I used Type-On 3 glue on this project since it will be outdoors. I probably shouldn't have used nails, but they'll hold it together while the glue dries. I added extra glue to these cracks to help keep it from coming apart so it'll last for many years. Off camera, I filled the other large cracks with epoxy. Next, I needed to hide the fact that my beams were never square and that everything didn't line up perfectly. So I used a hand plane to remove material in spots that were proud of the connecting joint. I also trimmed the base pieces flush with the rest of the post. To add a little styling on the back of the tenon, My daughter and I added an angle cut to the back corner. Then I marked the mounting spots on my spacer and pre-drilled holes in that for mounting bolts. Thinking this project was about done, I went outside and removed our old mailbox that had been there ever since we moved in. It wasn't a daily reminder or anything about how there was a new mailbox sitting in a box in my shop, unopened, taking up precious shop space. After trying brute force and failing to deadlift this old metal stake out of the ground, I had to work smarter and use a concrete block and an old 4x4 as the lever to remove it. I was nervous about using this metal spike for a few reasons. I knew this would be tough with all this gravel on the side of the road, so I was really hoping to not have to dig a hole. I glued up a wood block to be able to use a small sledgehammer to drive it into the ground. I tested to see how well it would work, and it went in fine a little ways. Now that it was time to hammer it all the way into the ground, I hammered it in some and then made sure it was going in straight. I hammered it in some more, and then more, and then more. Once I got to a certain point, it just wouldn't go in any further. Luckily, as I was beating the crap out of it, trying to force it into the ground, it bent, rotating to the side, but luckily it stayed straight vertically. One thing about having great friends is that they might happen to have a post hole digger that you can borrow. About the same depth that I got to with the metal spike, I found a large solid section of concrete. My final solution was to dig the hole wider. I trimmed the metal spike with a cutoff wheel on my grinder and then added some lag bolts sticking out at an angle to the post. I then set this all in concrete. I would have preferred to go deeper, but it just wouldn't go.
Take it out of the way.
It has held up fine, and I think it's good as long as no one has too many drinks and tries to use this thing as a tackling dummy.
It's a good thing that you have matured with age. True that.
Still thinking this project was about done, I was required by my wife to trim the top of the post down some. I was told that it looked like someone had passed away in front of our house. I didn't think that was very funny, but I did realize that the post may not have the right look that I was hoping for. I did get to this right away, only a month or two or so after the mailbox was up and in use. I didn't want to get to it too quickly and set some sort of new standard for project requests getting done in a timely manner around the house. Still thinking this project was about done, next I wanted to add a street number to hang from the bottom of the tenon. To make this sign, I used some scrap redwood that I glued together. I used my laser to add our street number, and then I added spar urethane for some protection. This is the same stuff that I put on the rest of the post. I by no means mastered this joint, but I did make a thing that holds a mailbox.
Thank you so much for watching to the end of this video. Watch one of these two next. You can do it!